o sefydlog sy'n ymwneud â threfn yn y cyfarfod llawn yn gymwys i'r cyfarfod yma a'r cyfyngiadau amser o ran hyd cwestiynau gaiff eu cymwyso i'r cyfarfod hwn hefyd. Felly'r eitem gyntaf ar yn agenda ni y bore yma yw'r cwestiynau i'r Prif Weinidog ac mae'r cwestiwn cyntaf gan Caroline Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. How is the Welsh Government supporting the dental profession in Wales during the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, shall we thank Caroline Jones for that question. We support the profession through implementation of a safe, phased, risk-based re-establishment of dental services. All the actions we take to reduce the risk of community transmission also help protect dental teams and patients from coronavirus in Wales.
Thank you, First Minister. The dental profession, like all sectors of the Welsh economy, are suffering deeply as a result of lockdown. And while the move out of the red alert level will bring some small relief, it will not be enough to support many practices. And we cannot afford to lose a single dental practice in Wales. And I've been contacted by many practices, often sole proprietors, who are worried that the loss of business will result in them going out of business and even losing their homes. First Minister, what financial support beyond the payment of 90% of annual contract value are you offering dentists in Wales to ensure that we don't lose any practices? Diolch.
So we support dental practices in Wales in a whole range of different ways. I think it's important to mention the word patients when we're talking about dental practices, because it is the safety of patients and staff that has to remain at the top of our agenda. There are a number of dental practices that are inherently risky where coronavirus is concerned, because the use of aerosol techniques, which are inevitable and necessary in dentistry, creates particular risks. We are supporting NHS dentists by making sure that 80% of NHS contracts were paid between April and June. We'll be paying 90% of those contracts from July. We're supporting those contracts and those contractors with PPE. So in a whole range of ways, we are supporting the profession. The main way we can support them is by making sure that we have a staged approach that resumes dental activity as fast as we can, as safely as we can. And that is the path we will continue alongside the profession to pursue in Wales.
Angela Burns.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Good morning, First Minister. You mentioned the aerosol generating procedures, and my understanding is that going forward, Welsh Government are promoting a 1-hour gap between those procedures to allow air exchange in surgeries. But the science behind this is negligible. Europe looked at 15 minutes between aerosol generating procedures, but they've since dropped that because the science is so non-existent on that particular process. On a day like today, when it's very still, hot, muggy, you know, how do you actually, first of all, where is the science for that, First Minister? Where can I go and reference that? And secondly, how do you actually propose that dentists are able to implement that change of air, that air exchange for an hour? Because just opening the windows on a day like today simply wouldn't do it.
Well, so with neither I nor the member are experts in the science that lies behind safe dental practice. For that, we have to rely on the people who are the experts, and that's why we have a Chief Dental Officer in Wales. I spoke yesterday with Dr. Colette Bridgman about the advice she is providing to the profession, how that advice is derived from discussions with leading members of the profession. We have to rely on the people who are employed as the most senior people in their field to give us advice. They keep that advice under regular review. If they feel it is safe to extend the range of activity, they will bring it forward. Dr. Bridgman acted on Friday of last week. Alongside the other changes that we announced, she lifted the red alert categorisation of dentistry in Wales to allow more procedures to be undertaken more quickly. But we can't proceed other than by relying upon the advice that those people who are much better placed than me, and with respect, much better placed than the member, to understand the science and to give that advice, and that is what we will continue to do.
Rhiannon Passmore.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, Wales Chief Dental Officer Dr Colette Bridgman has stated that there will be a phased and careful approach to the reopening of full routine dental services in Wales, and stated that this is that she is absolutely alive to the concerns of a prolonged period of inactivity of services for people's oral hygiene. Indeed, Wales Chief Dental Officer is on record as saying that the Welsh Government would keep timelines under constant review. So, First Minister, with Wales' success across the UK nations at keeping the reproduction number and growth rate at the spread of COVID-19 low, what measures can Welsh Government take to ensure that dental practices across Wales are equipped with the requisite hand sanitisers, masks, gloves, personal protective equipment and infection and prevention control resources, so that they can continue to reopen when circumstances safely permit? And will also the First Minister commit to my constituents in Islam that dentistry care will be seen as a priority area of focus for the Welsh Government as a vital part of the Welsh National Health Service, offering as it was to Wales's Labour and Iron Bevan?
Well, shall we thank Rhiannon Passmore for that, and thank her for drawing attention to the way things have been done in Wales. Unlike England or Scotland, dental practices in Wales have been able to remain open throughout the pandemic for urgent face-to-face care, and that's in addition to the urgent dental centres we have had open. And of course, we work very closely with those colleagues who are contractors in the National Health Service. And those dentists who choose to work within the National Health Service have all the benefits of that. And that includes provision of the sorts of resources that Rhiannon Passmore identified in her question. There are many dental practices that choose not to be part of the public service here in Wales, and they cannot expect to be able to choose not to be part of the service and then to have all the benefits of being in the service. If you're a private practitioner in a private business, then you have responsibilities to secure your own supplies or many of the things you need in order to be able to meet the regulatory standards that you will still have to observe. And I'm very happy to provide a commitment to the members' constituents in East London and across Wales that dentistry is a priority service for us. NHS dentistry is a priority for us. The Health Minister issued a written statement yesterday explaining how we will reopen dentistry in a way that is safe for staff and safe for patients. And that is the path that we will sustain in Wales.
Question 2, Mike Hedges.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the support provided to local media by the Welsh Government in order to keep residents informed during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank Mike Hedges for that question. So the Welsh Government has supported both local print and broadcast media during the pandemic. Paid advertising has been placed as part of our Keep Wales Safe campaign. Direct grant assistance has been provided through the Independent Community Journalism Fund, and we have worked with Ofcom to ensure that Welsh outlets have benefited from the Community Radio Fund.
Mike Hedges? Mike Hedges, your microphone.
I'll mute myself again, sorry. The media, thank you, First Minister. The media has been crucial for coverage of both the good and bad news in these challenging times. And sadly, the coverage of lives lost has not been limited to coronavirus, but also we have seen the shocking killing of George Floyd in America and the horrific knife attack in Reading over the weekend. During the floods earlier this year, and during the coronavirus lockdown, local radio stations such as Swansea Sound and newspapers such as the South Wales Evening Post have kept residents informed of what's going on. As the First Minister is aware, the Sunday morning breakfast show on Swansea Sound allows local people to question politicians and also to express their points of view. Will the First Minister join me and politicians across the chamber in calling on the owners of Swansea Sound to keep local programmes and local presenters for the benefit of the people of South West Wales?
Well, so I thank Mike Hedges for that, and he makes a very important point about the significance of local media in making sure that local residents are properly informed, not just of COVID-19, but of that wider range of things. And indeed, in Wales, people will have been thinking of the family and friends of people who were killed in that outrage in Reading at the weekend, and local media will have played a very important part in bringing and explaining to that local community the nature of that event. Llywydd, I have a very warm memory of joining Mike Hedges early one September morning to go and take listeners' questions at Swansea Sound. I remember being very impressed by the relaxed professionalism of the presenter there, Kev Johns, and indeed the alertness of Swansea Sound listeners early on this morning in phoning in to put questions to us. So I'm aware, of course, that Swansea Sound has been part of Bauer's purchase of 56 different radio stations across the United Kingdom. My understanding is that no format change request has been received by Ofcom from that company for Swansea Sound, and that means that the station, in whatever future name or arrangement it has, will continue to be required to fulfil the original format, and that includes commitments relating to the Welsh language and local news and information. Llywydd, I have participated in quite a large number of the 80 press conferences that the Welsh Government has participated in during the coronavirus crisis. About half of the participants have been local media, including Swansea Sound, and they have provided an essential service during the crisis, just in the way that Mike Hedges described.
David Melding.
Diolch yn fawr, Llywydd. First Minister, I think this is a very important question. Now, I understand 9 community news organisations have directly received a grant from the Welsh Government, and you've mentioned the role of procurement, advertising and public information. I also think that local authorities could do a lot in this area. It is really a vital service, as you indeed said, and we have to be aware that some of the traditional news providers are now under considerable strain, and we risk losing capacity and some very valuable and important local jobs if we don't, at this time of crisis, give fuller support to the local media sector.
Well, so I agree with what David Melding has said. We've been glad to have been able to repurpose funding that remained in the Community Journalism Fund. It's been over £76,000, and a range of outlets in Wales have benefited from that. The Community Radio Fund is a UK fund, and we've supported stations in Wales in making successful applications to it. There is a public interest in making sure, of course, that there is a vibrant local media in Wales. It has to be done carefully, because it must be entirely free of any suggestion that there is interference in any editorial decisions that the reporting of news would rely upon. But I think we managed to strike that balance and want to go on supporting, both by the access we offer to those publications and broadcast outlets, and directly where we are able to do that.
Sian Gwenllian.
Mae'n nghwestiwn i am yr wasg print cyfrwng Cymraeg. Dwi wedi bod yn holi eich llywodraeth chi faint o ddefnydd sydd yn cael ei wneud i rannu gwybodaeth am yr argyfwng drwy gyfrwng y wasg printiedig cyfrwng Cymraeg. Dwi wedi holi am ffigurau gwariant, ond dwi yn dal i ddisgwyl ffigurau swyddogol yn anffodus. Os fedrwch chi roed hynny ar waith, mi fyddwn ni yn ddiolchgar. Ond o fy ymchwil i, mae'r sefyllfa yn hynod siomedig. Enghraifft, dim ond un hysbyseb gwerth tua 800 punt sydd wedi ymddangos yn ein hunig wythnosolyn cyfrwng Cymraeg ers cychwyn y pandemig. Prif Weinidog, a wnewch chi sicrhau fod eich llywodraeth chi yn gwneud defnydd llawn o'r wasg print i ledaenu negeseuon pwysig i bobl Cymru, ac wnewch chi sicrhau fod y wasg print cyfrwng Cymraeg yn cael ei chynnwys yn llawn yn eich ymgyrchoedd cyhoeddusrwydd o hyn ymlaen?
Wel, wrth gwrs, Llywydd, mae'r pobl sy'n cael newyddion drwy gyfrwng Gymraeg yn pwysig i ni, ac mae'r gwasanaethau sydd ar gael iddyn nhw yn pwysig hefyd. Ni'n trial i cefnogi nhw, a ni'n trial i cefnogi nhw mewn print hefyd. Ni yn wario, arian i helpu y sector na i gario ymlaen yn y gwaith pwysig maen nhw'n wneud. Dwi'n siŵr bydd pobl yma yn gweithio'n galed ar y cwestiynau mae Sian Gwenllian wedi rhoi i fewn gyda'r nifer fawr y cwestiynau eraill, a pan bydd y ffigurau yna ar gael, ni'n mynd i dosbarthu nhw a rannu nhw gyda pobl eraill. So yn gyffredinol, wrth cwrs, ni'n eisiau cefnogi'r sector i wneud e mewn ffordd priodol, a wneud e gyda'r popeth arall ni'n wneud i trial i hybu y iaith Cymraeg.
Cwestiwn nawr gan arweinwyr y pleidiau ag arweinydd Blaidoriaeth Paul Davies.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, last week your government took the decision to resume non-essential retail activity in Wales, but kept its 5-mile travel rule, meaning that many families across Wales are still unable to reunite with their loved ones. As more and more people return to work and interact safely with colleagues and members of the public, last week's announcement was a prime opportunity to consider scrapping the Welsh Government's 5-mile travel rule. Non-essential businesses have been allowed to resume trading, and as people are able to travel more than 5 miles to visit a garden centre, it still begs the question why they cannot see their loved ones. Therefore, can you tell us, First Minister, what specific scientific evidence do you have as a government to keep the 5-mile rule in place?
Well, Llywydd, every time I answer this question, I have to correct members. To begin with, I think it's just a mistake. When I have to correct it time after time, I begin to think that it's done deliberately. The member knows perfectly well that there is no rule of the sort that he describes. If there was a rule, there would be a regulation. There is no regulation. The regulation says stay local. 5 miles is advice to people as to what stay local might mean, and it would be very helpful if the leader of the opposition were to be clearer in his questioning so that people don't get the wrong impression. People must stay local. They must interpret that in their own localities. We have retained the 5-mile rule for another 2 weeks. If everything is as we hope it will be, by the start of July, we will be able to confirm that that will no longer apply in Wales. It has been a very important part of our armoury to prevent the spread of the virus from one community to another. Mr. Davies represents a constituency in the far southwest of Wales, where people have been very anxious about visitors from beyond that part of Wales, from places where the virus has been in more virulent spread, coming and bringing that virus with them. Because we have had a stay local rule in Wales, places like Pembrokeshire have been very much shielded from the impact of coronavirus. There's the success of our policy, and it's felt directly by the members' own constituents.
First Minister, you can dress this up as much as you want, and you've just said there isn't a 5-mile rule. If that is the case, why on earth include 5 miles in the guidance in the first place? And it's quite clear your 5-mile rule continues to cause immeasurable anguish to so many families across Wales. And you had an opportunity last week to give families some hope that they could start to see their loved ones safely and complying with social distancing regulations. Now, yesterday we saw further restrictions lifted in other parts of the UK, where the decision has been made to relax the social distancing guidance in England from 2 metres to 1 metre. Now, the social distancing regulations were rightly introduced here in Wales at the start of this pandemic in order to help limit the spread of the virus. However, as the R rate continues to have fallen to this level, it's right to reassess these regulations. Your colleague, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said he welcomed the statement overall, adding that he believes the UK government is trying to do the right thing, and in that he supports them. Given that the World Health Organization already recommends a distance of at least 1 metre, can you confirm what assessment the Welsh Government has made of the impact of relaxing the social distancing regulations, and what discussions are you having with professionals and indeed colleagues regarding this matter?
So to return to the member's first point, I do hope that he is advising his constituents that it is perfectly possible in Wales today for people who have a compassionate reason for doing so to travel more than a local distance in order to see people who need that visit. It would be a great shame if people informed about that, because the people in the circumstances that he described ought to be able to act in accordance with that ability to make a compassionate visit where that is necessary. And that's available to people in Wales today, as it has been since the changes were made. In relation to changes made across our border, I look forward to seeing the evidence on which those changes were made. I spoke yesterday morning to Michael Gove, the Secretary of State in the Cabinet Office, and he promised that the devolved administrations would see all the evidence that the UK government has used in coming to its conclusions. That evidence had not arrived by the end of yesterday, but we certainly hope to see it today. In Wales, the message remains, stay 2 meters apart. That is the safe way to behave. The science we have seen, is the science from SAGE, says that if you halve the distance, the risk increases somewhere between 2 and 5 times greater than if you stay at a 2 meter distance. That is the science. The member was interested in the science when it concerned him. That's the science in relation to the 2 meter rule. If, because the transmission of the disease is falling in Wales, we are able to make some exceptions in some sectors, provided it is safe to do so and put mitigating measures in place, then of course we will consider that very carefully. I know that sectors in England are waiting today to see the guidance as to how they will be able to use the advice that they were given yesterday in a practical way. We too will look forward to seeing that, if it is possible, always using public health as our primary test to reduce the 2 meter rule by exception, then we will see what we are able to do in Wales. But we will do it by looking at the evidence first and making the decision second, not making the decision and then looking for the evidence.
Well, First Minister, one sector that certainly needs some relaxation in its regulations is the tourism and hospitality sectors. Now, last week's statement was, of course, welcomed, but it has resulted in more questions than answers given the correspondence I've received from people with tourism businesses. The tourism and hospitality industry needs clarity, in my view, in the form of a detailed strategy, both for the short term and indeed the longer term. A strategy that clearly marks the Welsh Government's intentions against timescales, funding allocations, and support to ensure businesses can remain viable. And a strategy that answers the questions the sector has, not results in operators feeling more confused than ever. First Minister, will you therefore commit to providing a specific strategy for Welsh tourism that outlines exactly how the Welsh Government will support the sector in the short term and provides clarity for the longer term, so that businesses can be confident about the viability of the industry going forward? And given the vulnerability of the hospitality sector in Wales, what immediate action is the Welsh Government taking to support hospitality businesses across the country?
Well, Llywydd, the announcement that we made on Friday does give hope to the tourism industry in Wales. It came as a result of very detailed discussions with the sector itself. The sector must now prepare to demonstrate that it is able to reopen safely in self-contained accommodation, and that it is able to take its local communities with it, because community consent remains a fundamentally important part of the plan for that industry. When the industry has demonstrated, as I certainly hope it can, that it is able safely to reopen on the terms we have announced so far, then our aim will be to add to the repertoire of things that can be done by that industry. But it is important we do it step by step, that we provide confidence to local communities by demonstrating that the reopening of the industry can be done in a way that protects the health of staff, visitors, and people who live in those localities. And I think the industry understands that very well. So the siren calls for clarity in a set of circumstances that are so intrinsically unclear seems to me to miss the point by a very wide mark indeed. If the member is able to tell me what the state of the virus in Wales will be 6 weeks, let alone 6 months away from where we are today, then we would be able to provide clarity of the sort that he requires. But it's just not possible, and I'm sure he does understand that none of us know how this disease will progress as we move through the summer and into the autumn. We do our best to provide forward guidance to sectors in Wales, but to ask us to provide clarity where none is possible would be to provide a false prospectus to those industry, not something helpful of the sort that we wish to provide.
Arweinydd Plaid Cymru, Adam Price.
First Minister, some residents had only returned to their homes following the February flooding when torrential rain fell in the village of Pentre last week, causing further damage to properties. In 2017, Welsh ministers were expected to appoint a chair and members to the Flood and Coastal Erosion Committee before the end of that year. In reality, members of that committee, which was established under the terms of the Environment Wales Act 2016, weren't actually announced until March 2019, and their first meeting wasn't held until June 2019. That's 2 years without adequate focus on your government's strategy on flooding. First Minister, why did it take so long?
Well, I don't agree with the member at all that the appointments of that sort have meant that we have not had a very significant focus on flooding, both inland and coastal flooding in Wales. We have used this Assembly term to bring together the most ambitious funding package for flood and coastal erosion in Wales that we have ever seen. That working with our local authorities, we have amended the share of funding between Welsh Government and local authorities. We now fund all of the preparation works for those schemes, and our contribution to grant support to local authorities is to be increased to 85% of the total of those schemes. I think that demonstrates in a good deal more concrete way than some appointments the extent to which we have invested in this field. I have enormous sympathy, Llywyd, for those individuals that Adam Price mentioned, who have spent the time over the last couple of months getting their homes back in order only to find them flooded again. But I don't think that when they are dealing with that, they are worrying about appointments to government committees.
We're in the middle of two immediate crises, health-related and economic, but there is a third, the ecological crisis, which we can't afford to ignore. It'll have long-term consequences, but there will also be some immediate ones, including an increased risk of flooding. Now, research by the universities of Birmingham and Southampton shows that planting trees around rivers could reduce the height of flooding in terms by up to 20%. Almost a decade ago, the Welsh Government adopted the ambitious and widely lauded target of planting 5,000 hectares of new woodland every year until 2030. This target was dropped to 2,000 hectares. In the last 5 years, the Welsh Government has achieved an average of just 300 hectares a year. And in the 12 months up until March this year, it achieved just 4% of the target. First Minister, where's the urgency in the climate emergency?
Well, I agree with the member that the extent of woodland creation in Wales last year was not good enough. It's important to say that as well as new woodland creation, an enormous effort goes into the restocking of woodland. And in fact, we planted more trees in restocking woodland last year than we did the year before. But new woodland creation was not where we would want it to be last year. It is to some extent a factor of timings within the rural development programme as to when money is released to the sector. But we have quadrupled the amount of money that we are putting into the Glassdeer scheme, which has been the Glassdeer woodland creation rounds have been the most successful means we have found to date to stimulate the planting of new trees in Wales. Its budget will now be £8 million, up from £2 million, and I am confident that we will see a significant and necessary increase in new woodland creation in Wales, alongside our ambitions for a national forest.
Since 2015, Natural Resources Wales has been suffering a steady decline in funding while being tasked with more and more responsibilities. NRW is now facing a further cut of 7.5 million. So that the Welsh Government is cutting back on funding, cutting back on tree planting, and seemingly cutting back on its commitment to tackling the climate emergency. Now, what many people in the Rhondda and adjacent communities want now is an immediate and expert-led inquiry to discover why they are enduring persistent flooding, and crucially, what needs to be done to stop this. First Minister, will you commit to such an inquiry today?
Well, Llywydd, we are not cutting back on tree planting. We are quadrupling our investment in tree planting. And while NRW has inevitably had to bear its share of a decade of austerity, so it isn't NRW's budget that is being cut year on year, it is the Welsh Government's budget that has been cut year on year since 2010. And I'm afraid no part of the public service can be regarded as wholly immune from that. There will be inquiries. There are legal responsibilities that fall on the local authority and NRW when flooding takes place. And I know that those local players are working very hard already to make sure that we understand why flooding took place, again in those parts of the Rhondda very recently, to add that to what our understanding has been of the flooding back in February. And then when we've had that local investigations concluded, we will use the outcome to make sure that we put further mitigation measures in place.
Arweinydd Plaid Brexit, Mark Reckless.
First Minister, yesterday the Prime Minister announced the reopening of restaurants, pubs and entertainment venues, and a switch from regulation to guidance, saying he would trust in the British people's common sense. Can you confirm that emphasis on British common sense does not apply to Wales, and you intend to keep Wales lagging several weeks behind England? The Leader of the Opposition here cited the Leader of the Opposition in Westminster and his general support for the UK government approach. Similarly, aside from my group, isn't it the case that there has been cross-party support here for the different approach enabled by devolution in Wales? Unlike the much discussed 5-mile guidance, the 2-metre rule is enshrined in law, with all business in Wales having to nominate someone to be liable for prosecution. It was endorsed and entrenched by this Senedd with the support not just of Labour and Plaid members, but also the votes of Welsh Conservatives. If members want to follow a UK approach and reopen our economy, don't they need to vote for it?
So the Prime Minister's announcements yesterday were announcements for England. This Senedd must accept its responsibilities in the way the member says for making regulations for Wales. We will continue to do so in a way that puts the health of our population at the forefront of the way that we bring proposals to the floor of the Senedd and seek to secure support for them. There is a minority, it's represented by the member, who wished that they lived somewhere else and that decisions were made differently. We are confident that we have the support, not just of the breadth of the Senedd behind the approach we are taking, but that we have the support of Welsh people for it as well.
First Minister, the fact that some people may be in a minority or disagree with your approach does not mean they want to live elsewhere. Today we vote on the supplementary budget with vast appropriations and reallocations of funds. But in your government amendment to a later debate today, you suggest it's not enough. And the UK government must urgently remove fiscal restrictions which prevent Welsh government responding effectively to the pandemic. But isn't it your government's use of exorbitant powers you already have in the field of health that is causing a decline in Welsh revenues relative to England? What is the impact of harsher, longer lockdown in Wales on Welsh revenues and those rates of income tax. What further decline in land transaction tax receipts will we now see, given that the English housing market had reopened 6 weeks ago, yet you continue to ban house viewings here except for empty properties? Given the consequent fiscal hole, how long will it be, First Minister, before you use the powers which the Conservatives granted to raise income tax by an unlimited amount?
So the member always manages to turn a sensible question into a piece of nonsense, as he did right at the end. So you can be quite sure that there is no such proposal anywhere other than in his own mind. The point that we are making to the Treasury is just a series of sensible points. We want to have the ability to convert capital into revenue at a time when the pressure on our revenue budgets is like it has never been before. We want greater flexibility to be able to use the Welsh Reserve in a way that would allow us to respond to the conditions of a global pandemic. These are sensible measures that will allow us to manage the pressures we are under in a way that responds to them within our own resources. It's time that the rules at the Treasury caught up with the nature of devolution. And let's hope that we are able to use this opportunity to accelerate some of the thinking that has, I think, remained stuck in previous ways of doing things for too long.
Before I call the next question, and in line with my role to ensure the proper conduct of Senedd business, and to remind us all that we are meeting today remotely and virtually, I am aware that one member is in the chamber and filming himself and broadcasting to that point on social media. I will ask for that member to be removed now from the the virtual Parliament, and we will be closing the chamber in due course. My advice to Mr McAvoy is not to play games with your Parliament. Question 3, David Rowlands.
Diolch, Llywydd. What assessment has the First Minister made of the effectiveness of the actions taken by the Welsh Government during the COVID-19 pandemic?
I thank the member for the question. The effectiveness of all our actions is assessed through the lens of public health, keeping people and communities safe in Wales during the pandemic. The 3-week review cycle means that everything we do is assessed in the light of the most recent available evidence.
Well, I thank the First Minister for that answer. I do understand that there can be no real definitive answers until an inquiry has been convened and the report produced, and that will, of course, take time. But I would at this time ask the First Minister to put together an interim report, one that would allow corrective actions to be put in place quickly based on the knowledge gained over the last few months.
Well, let me begin by agreeing with David Rowlands. It's very important to learn from the experience that we are having, and we are doing our very best to do that every single day as we think over the events of recent weeks and plan for the challenges that lie ahead. But I do want to explain to him, and you know, I know that he is likely to understand that the Welsh Government is absolutely flat out still in dealing with the crisis that is in front of us. Just this week, dealing with outbreaks of coronavirus in North Wales, looking at the impact on the meat processing sector more generally, continuing to make sure that we provide testing in our care home sector, that we look at further opportunities we may be able to offer people in Wales to resume freedoms that they've been denied during the crisis. All the people we have, and you know, the huge majority of Welsh Government employees are not working in the normal way. They are still working from home, are being deployed still to focus on the immediate challenges we face to prepare for the coming autumn and winter. The moment will come, as David Rowan said, where there will be an opportunity to stand back and do a formal review of these things. Informally, we learn all the time and apply that learning. But until we are in calmer waters, where we are not every day having to deal with the impact of this crisis in the lives of Welsh people and Welsh communities, that moment has not yet come.
Andrew Arty Davies.
Thank you, First Minister, for that response. One measure I welcome in recent weeks over the COVID regulations is obviously the opening of schools next week. I declared interest as a member of a local authority, and in particular our local authority has issued guidance to say that they are unable to take the opportunity to open schools on the 4th week because the contractual negotiations haven't been concluded with the unions by the Welsh Government. Do you think that is a fair reason to have schools closed across Wales because Welsh Government have failed to reach conclude contractual negotiations with the unions?
Well, so with my colleague Kirsty Williams will answer a topical question on this matter later this afternoon. Let me just repeat that the advice that the Welsh Government provided was that if it were possible to create 4 weeks of resumed education in Wales, the case for doing that was strong. We always recognised from the beginning that there was a contractual issue in the 4th week, which is why we proposed that for teachers who worked in the 4th week, there would be an extra week of holiday restored to them at the October half term. But as the WLGA said in welcoming our proposals, it was for them to take the proposals and put them into operation in the different circumstances that each local authority in Wales faces. And that's the way it has to be because they are the employers, not the Welsh Government. There will be children in Wales who will be in places where 4 weeks of school opening is possible. And I'm very glad that those local education authorities able to do so have been able to reach that agreement. Other local authorities will face different challenges, different circumstances and come to different conclusions. That's inevitable in the way that things are done.
Cwestiwn 4, Janet Finch-Saunders.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on support for the hospitality sector in Wales in light of COVID-19?
Thank the member for that question. The package of support for the hospitality sector in Wales is the most generous in the United Kingdom. Thousands of businesses have benefited from 100% small business rate relief and the Welsh Government's Economic Resilience Fund. In total, over £330 million has been provided to assist the sector during the pandemic.
Thank you. North Wales tourism businesses and organisations have said that if tourism was allowed to open today, 10,500 tourism sector jobs could be lost in North Wales, and they cite your government and you to be destroying this vital industry. To refute those claims, what support will you make available to businesses that cannot open on the 13th of July? Self-contained accommodation businesses, en-suite hotels, desperately need a vision with guidance on how to safely prepare. Will you provide this? Will you clarify exactly what you mean by self-contained accommodation, working with their local communities? Will you clearly state whether campsites with shared facilities can prepare to open if they close these? First Minister, your leadership on this issue has never been under any such scrutiny, and I have to say, with much criticism. Diolch.
Well, I thank the member for those questions. Of course, the actions of government are under scrutiny, so they should be. That's why we have answered questions on the floor of the Senedd every single week during this pandemic and will continue to do so. As far as the self-contained sector within the tourism industry is concerned, of course, we work with the sector to provide guidance and to answer their questions. It's guidance that is provided with the sector itself. We've been working with the UK Hospitality Cymru and the Wales Tourism Alliance to make sure that their best practice guidance for working safely in the visitor economy is there for everybody in preparation for lifting of restrictions. Visit Wales has hosted 3 consultation events with over 100 representatives from the 4 tourism forums across Wales, as well as with industry representative bodies. The purpose of giving people notice that they should prepare is to make sure that when questions arise, there is time to resolve those questions with the sector. And I know the sector is very much looking forward to being able to reopen and to do it in a way that is safe, in a way that safeguards the reputation of the sector. And when the sector can demonstrate that it has been able to do that successfully, then we will want to allow it to do more. But there's a real reputational issue here for the sector. And to rush at it in the way that the member suggests, without any proper preparation, to open campsites with shared facilities, that will not be happening. Let me assure her of that in the first wave, because we know that coronavirus thrives in shared facilities. Why would we put the reputation of this really important industry in Wales at risk by allowing unsafe practices to take place? We won't do that. We will proceed in the way that we have set out, carefully, step by step, demonstrating success, allowing more to happen when that success has been demonstrated in a way that will safeguard the long-term reputation of this vitally important industry in Wales.
Helen Mary Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. The First Minister will be aware of the announcement this week by Castell Howell, a very important food business in my region, that they are consulting about redundancies. This is, of course, partly because they have depended on the hospitality sector as their customers. Will the First Minister commit today to ensuring that his government and his officials work closely with the company to see if there's any way in which the redundancies can be avoided? And will he commit in future to reviewing Welsh Government procurement policies so that companies like Castell Howell may be able to benefit further from them in future?
I'm very happy to do both of those things, Llywydd. Our officials will certainly work carefully with that very important company, and we have an ambition to spend more of the Welsh pound on Welsh businesses, and some very important things have been achieved in Sir Gar, in particular in recent times, in getting local food supplies into local communities. The UK government has a part to play here too, Llywydd. Its furlough scheme must not be a blunt instrument. Where there are parts of the economy that cannot reopen because of the longer term impacts of coronavirus, then it's important to those sectors that the furlough scheme, which I understand will have to be adapted, I understand it must be withdrawn from parts of the economy that are able to resume, but where that is not the case, and hospitality is certainly part of that with the knock-on effects into other industries, then the furlough scheme needs to remain an important part in the armoury of the UK government, supplemented by what we are able to do through our Economic Resilience Fund to go on supporting sectors and really important businesses like Castell Howell, so they are able still to have a successful future.
Question 5, Alun Davies.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the economy of the heads of the valleys?
Diolch Llywydd, the appointment on Friday of a preferred bidder for the construction of the £500 million sections 5 and 6 of the Heads of the Valleys Road is an important milestone in the future of the economy in that part of Wales. It will deliver economic and community benefits in a post-coronavirus recovery period. And of that £500 million, £170 million is expected within the local supply chain alone.
First Minister, I'm grateful for that. And of course, we're also still waiting to finish the section from Gilwan to Bryn Mawr, and I think that will be welcome when that is completed. But we all welcome the human impact of a coronavirus. We all recognize, the human impact of a coronavirus. And we know that there's already broad and deep support for the approach the Welsh Government is taking. But we need to continue to provide the support to people for the post-COVID era, and what's going to happen to employment, particularly in at that time. In Blaenau Gwent, we all know people who are fearful of losing their jobs. We see the uncertainty around the future of the Festival Park in Ebbw and we know that there remains an urgent need to invest in strategic sites, such as on the Rasa or Rhyd y Blew. I would therefore ask you to work alongside me and other members who represent these constituencies to deliver a jobs plan for the heads of valleys, which will secure employment immediately and in the long term.
Shall we thank us to Alan Davies for that important set of questions. He will be pleased to know, I know his constituents will be, that the Gilwern to Bryn Mawr section of the Heads of the Valleys Road is now 85% completed, despite the real challenges, the geological challenges that there have been in that part of Wales. Concerned as he is, I know, at the Festival Park site in Ebbw Vale, and we're working closely with the local authority there to see what can be done to address the announcements of last week. We continue to progress our plan for the high-tech cluster on the nearby work site and to prepare other sites so that they are in a good position to attract jobs into the Blaenau Gwent area. But to just respond for a moment, shall we, to the general point that Alan Davies made, we should all of us be concerned at the jobs impact of coronavirus. Thinking of the 30-year experience of some communities in Wales to recover from the 1980s and the deliberate loss of jobs in those communities then. Coronavirus isn't a deliberate action, of course, but its impact can be profound. And I want to give Alan Davies and others an assurance that the Welsh Government will be relentlessly focused during the rest of this Senedd term on doing everything we can to support employment in those areas, so the scarring effect on young people in particular parts of Wales is avoided as much as we can possibly do by harnessing our actions with those of others to support those local economies and those local jobs.
Leanne Wood. Your microphone, Leanne Wood.
Thank you. First Minister, with news this week that there are 50 people chasing every single job in the Rhondda, and that comes on the back of the news that there are 2 towns in the top 20 most vulnerable to economic problems following COVID, then it's clear that there needs to be a specific jobs plan for the Rhondda. We've already heard how we need a new sustainable drainage system, how we need a mass tree planting strategy, and we also need things like renewable energy. Can you please tell us what investment you plan to make in the infrastructure of the Rhondda, and how you intend to reverse the situation whereby people in the Rhondda have been ignored by successive Welsh and UK governments since the 1980s?
Well, so it's nonsense to suggest that people of the Rhondda have been ignored. They certainly haven't. And if they have, then she'll be asking herself what she herself has done as the representative of that area to put it right. It wouldn't be a very proud record for me as a representative to stand up and say that my area had been ignored, and it hasn't been, and she knows it hasn't been. But I want to reply to the substantive and sensible point that she made, that of course our concerns have to be for those parts of Wales who are particularly vulnerable to an economic downturn. We are working very hard inside the Welsh Government to bring capital money together and capital projects together, so that if, as we hope, the UK Government respond in the Chancellor's statement in July by putting a new set of investments into infrastructure to create jobs, but to create the conditions of the future, that we are as well placed as we can be to have projects ready to use that money and to use it for the advantage of communities across Wales, with a particular emphasis on those places where the coronavirus impact will be felt the greatest. And that certainly does include the Rhondda, and it certainly does include a number of the measures that Leanne Wood mentioned in the opening part of her question. And she can be assured that those things are very much part of our thinking and will continue to be so.
Cwestiwn 6, Susie Davies.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister provide an update on the reopening of the Welsh tourism sector?
Thank the member for that. Llywydd, on the 19th of June, I indicated that provided public health considerations allowed, the Welsh Government would lift the stay local requirement on the 6th of July, and at the same time I signalled to owners of self-contained accommodation to prepare to reopen from July the 13th.
Well, thank you, obviously, for your announcement on Friday, although I have to say that the concept of community consent and use of the word bookings in the narrative haven't really helped the static caravan park owners or van owners themselves understand what they can do. But last week I asked the Economy Minister why non-VAT registered tourism companies are being treated differently from non-VAT registered firms or sole traders when it comes to accessing the ERF. These are micro businesses unable to access the self-employed support and not the larger operations to which he made reference in his reply. Some of them are very exciting, novel green tourism micro businesses or small B&Bs, and anecdotally, quite a high proportion of them are run by women. So could you please revisit this, as in my view, there is no justification at all for treating two businesses differently on the basis of a registration at Companies House, with one version having a right to support and the other having to go begging to a hardship fund?
Well, so first of all, let me make it clear that static caravans, where they are self-contained, will be able to reopen from the 13th of July. And I'm not absolutely certain I understand what the problem of bookings is. Because people are able to take bookings from the 13th of July. They need to be aware that that date remains subject to the circulation of the virus at the time. That's inevitable, and that's exactly the same way that her government in the United Kingdom has always proceeded. They make announcements and they make it clear that those things have to be confirmed closer to the time, because none of us knows what the state of coronavirus will be in weeks ahead. On her point about VAT registration, look, I just have to explain. Our aim is to try to get money out to people as fast as possible, and to do so with the least bureaucracy as possible. But this is public money, and the public have a right to know that there is a level of probity in the way that it is being spent on their behalf. And we have used VAT registration as a shortcut through a whole series of other checks we would have had to have made to make sure that people who make applications to us are bona fide. If they have VAT registration, they will already have had to have gone through a number of checks, and we rely on those as part of our probity requirements in handing out public money for proper purposes. Now, I understand that that has meant that people who are not VAT registered haven't been able to benefit in the same way. And we've worked hard within the second phase of the ERF to try to be able to address that. But it's there for a proper purpose. It's there for a purpose that Susie Davies, I think in other circumstances, will recognise very well. That if you're spending public money, there's an obligation on you to make sure that you've put at least a minimum amount of checks into the system to make sure that the schemes we're putting up very rapidly aren't taken advantage of by people who just think that, you know, this may be a quick way to get money out of a government when you're not a proper business at all.
Cwestiwn 7, Mick Antonev.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the support provided to foster parents during the coronavirus emergency?
That's how foster carers make a vital, positive contribution to the lives of looked after children. I'm extremely thankful for their continued dedication during these exceptional times. Foster carers across Wales have risen to some really challenging moments and continue to provide crucial support to some of our most vulnerable young people.
Well, First Minister, thank you for that answer, and I'll be grateful if you join with me in thanking foster parents, the length and breadth of Wales, for the contribution that they make every day, and especially during the emergency. That lockdown has increased pressures on vulnerable families, job losses, worsening mental health, contributing to the potential for family breakdown. So Does the First Minister share my concern at the report from Barnardo's that the number of children in Wales needing foster care has risen by 45%, whilst the number of people coming forward as prospective foster parents has halved? And will he indicate how the Welsh Government can help to bridge the gap and recognise the really valuable contribution of foster parents that they make and support them in the valuable work that they do?
Well, I definitely want to join Mick Anthony in paying tribute to the work that foster carers do in Wales and have done during the pandemic crisis. Both he and I have been foster parents in the past and know something of both the challenges but also the enormous joys that it can bring. I read the Barnardo's report. I think it's just important to be clear that the landscape of foster caring in Wales is different to the UK position. In other parts of the United Kingdom, Barnardo's and third sector organisations play a much larger part in the provision of fostering services than they do in Wales. The use of charitable providers in Wales, including Barnardo's, is 3% of the total foster care workforce, and that proportion has been falling. Local authorities in Wales continue to provide nearly 3/4 of all foster care, and Care Inspectorate Wales has provided a report on foster care activity over April and May of this year. They report very few breakdowns in foster care, a general stability and a good level of placement availability. So while the report makes very interesting reading, it's important we think about the issues that it raises. I don't think it tells us what is happening in the bulk of foster care across Wales. And local authorities, I think, have worked hard to support those foster carers. Interesting to learn from them that the sort of help the foster carers have asked for has not been funding per se. It has been help with making sure that they have the equipment that children need to learn remotely. It's for socialization. It's to keep up contact with families of origin where that is part of the plan for that child. And local authorities have worked hard to assist their foster carers in that. And once again, I just agree with the points that Mick Anthony has made about the amazing efforts that those families make on behalf of vulnerable children in Wales.
Cwestiwn 8, John Griffiths. Your microphone, John. Can you just wait until the microphone's on? Carry on.
What further action will the Welsh Government take to ensure that the provision of education from September onwards is of a high standard?
So the Welsh Government is working with partners to ensure that the best practice of the past 3 months is adopted more widely in future. Estyn inspectors will visit schools in Wales from September onwards as part of this system-wide effort.
First Minister, there is great concern regarding our children's life chances, particularly those in our most impoverished families. Too few pupils considered vulnerable have returned to school, and working at home has been very variable. It seems the return to school at the end of this month will typically be for a few hours once a week and may not include the extra 4th week. And of course, when the return to school in the autumn term begins, blended learning really must be of a high standard in all our schools, every one of our schools. So First Minister, what action will Welsh Government take to ensure a Wales-wide response with schools, unions and LEAs stepping up to the plate within clear national requirements?
So I thank John Griffiths for that. He is right that too few vulnerable children have come forward during the pandemic period, but we have gone from around 300 children in the very early weeks to over 1,500 in the latest week. So we've had a steady increase in the number of children coming forward, and reopening all schools on the 29th of June will be another important step, because we know that vulnerable children are less likely to attend a school that is not their own. There are many reasons for that, and when their own school reopens with familiar teachers and familiar faces, we are confident we will see more of those children back in education. But I agree with John Griffiths that September needs to bring with it a very different school experience, and that learning from the success of the last weeks will be very important to that, because while variability has been a feature, it has also been a feature that there are many, many schools who have risen very powerfully to the challenge of providing remote learning blended with contact from the school remotely as well for children. What we want to do is to make sure that there is a national expectation that all schools learn from the experience of the best and put that to work for the benefit of children and young people from September. And as I said in my original answer, we'll be deploying STIM as part of that effort to make sure that the fantastic things, and they are fantastic things, that so many heads and teachers have invented to assist children and young people in Wales are understood by the rest of the system, that they are adopted by the rest of the system, and that the education from September onwards is of as high a standard as we can make it in the circumstances that we will face at the time.
Cwestiwn 9, Nick Ramsey.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's policies for supporting the economy during the current pandemic?
Llywydd, we're doing all that we can to mitigate the effects of the pandemic on our economy. Our £1.7 billion package of support means Welsh businesses have access to the most generous help for businesses anywhere in the United Kingdom.
Thank you, First Minister. These are clearly challenging times. You said earlier in response to question 4, I think it was Janet Finch-Saunders, that where certain areas of the economy, such as hospitality and tourism, cannot reopen, the UK government furloughing scheme should continue. Of course, it strikes me that if those areas of the economy are reopening in England, then there will be no furloughing and therefore no consequential money for furloughing in Wales. So is it not the case, First Minister, that for the good of the Welsh economy, it's important that you do review the situation and look to reopen as much of the hospitality industry as possible in Wales as swiftly and as safely as possible? And if that isn't possible, then surely your government will have to look at ways of funding support schemes such as furloughing yourselves, and that surely must involve some sort of extra borrowing or tax rises at some point in time.
Well, so with both the words swift and safe have to mean something in all of this. It can't be swift at the expense of safe. And if it were to be, then it wouldn't be very swift at all, because we'd just be plunged back into the crisis from which we are now emerging. Nobody should believe that the announcements made yesterday by the UK government mean that the hospitality industry in England will resume as it was before the crisis began. I thought the Prime Minister was very clear himself about that yesterday, and there will be a need to support that industry at a UK level, and that's what we look to the UK government to do.
Finally, Russell George.
George Llywydd. First Minister, the further job losses at Llwr, an iconic and major employer in Newtown, would have been headline news if it wasn't for this current pandemic. It's absolutely devastating, of course, that the retail and manufacturing operations will cease. This couldn't have come at a worse time, I'm sure you'll agree. Just a few months ago, approximately 550 workers were employed by Llwr in Newtown. Hundreds have been made redundant, and clearly those who are remaining in work are anxious as their jobs also hang in the balance. There was a loyal workforce in Newtown, many working for the company for decades. Can I implore the Welsh Government to leave no stone unturned when it comes to this final opportunity to save this internationally renowned company, which has a long history of employing whole families in my constituency? What advice can you give to those who have been made redundant? And finally, what more can the Welsh Government do to support the highly skilled and loyal staff or former staff of Llwr and all those in the wider supply chain who have been adversely affected by this very, very sad news?
Llywydd, can I agree with the member about the seriousness of the news. Employment has been, as Russell George said, over many, many years within that industry, and whole families have been part of that experience. And it is very sad, and we would at other times have been concentrating on it in a different way. But the Welsh Government will mobilise the help that we have used successfully in other examples of this sort, working with UK operations, the DWP and so on, as well as the things that we are able to put together to do everything we can to see if there's anything further that might still be possible in terms of the industry itself, and where that isn't possible, to invest in the skills of that local population to discover other opportunities and to make sure that all the help that we can provide alongside others is mobilised for the benefit of the members' constituents in the very difficult circumstances that they must face.
Diolch i'r